Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the weekly MMA Cycles Market Update. This is your host, Gianni DePouyan. I'm joined this week by a very special guest, Pouyan Zolfagharnia, a graduate of MMTA. Pouyan, how are you doing today?
Good. Thank you, Gianni. It's great to be here.
It's great to have you back. It's been a couple months since we've had you, but a lot has happened in markets since then. So we have no shortage of markets and signatures to talk about. So without further ado, let me go ahead and share my screen here. We can start off by talking about stocks. So we came into this week, last week we had Ray on the show and we were talking about the geocosmic signatures and the potential for the formation of a low. The Dow Jones did make a new low and rallied up nicely higher on Thursday, but now is trading down a little bit here on Friday. So Pouyan, what's your take on what's going on in the equity markets?
I think we were expecting a primary cycle to form. So I think that was called in most of our reports, and we're in the time band now. It's starting from last week, so we're hoping to get a strong rally out of this one.
Yeah.
Especially, I would say, as we go on to look at the Nasdaq, I think we've already seen that rally commence.
Yeah, well, the NASDAQ really showing some relative strength here, and that's no surprise for viewers of the show because we've been talking about Saturn leaving Aquarius and how tech was likely going to underperform as long as Saturn was still in Aquarius. But Saturn left Aquarius earlier this month on March 7th. And, this past week, we had a lot of signatures take place. We had a square between Mars and Neptune. We had a conjunction between the Sun and Neptune. And then we also had Venus ingress into the sign of Taurus and square Pluto. So, stocks have done pretty well with all those Venus signatures we talked about. But I think the big story here, Pouyan, is tech starting to show signs of life ever since Saturn left Aquarius. And yeah, you can make an argument that we've been rallying for, since before Saturn went into Aquarius, but on a relative basis, if we compare the performance of the tech heavy NASDAQ compared to the S&P and Dow, the outperformance has been impossible to ignore. So any other insights on what's going on in NASDAQ or tech overall?
Very excited about the NASDAQ and what it's going to do because we have got Pluto coming into Aquarius as well. Whenever Pluto's involved, we generally see some big moves. And with the NASDAQ underperforming last year, I'm quite hopeful. I'm optimistic with the NASDAQ. Secretly bullish with it, and I've been waiting for this rally for a while. So I think with the Saturn Uranus square that formed in the fall of 22. So we saw the low form in October. That was actually the time band we were looking for, the long-term low for the crypto markets as well. And it was interesting to see the NASDAQ bottomed out bang in that time frame. I think the cryptos were out by 2 or 3 weeks, which is still amazing when you're looking at a long-term 4-year cycle. So it's been exciting seeing these markets rally.
Indeed. Well, you mentioned Pluto going into Aquarius. That's going to be next week on the 23rd. And then we also have Mars ending his 6-month trek or 8-month trek rather through Gemini, going into Cancer on the 25th. But I want to bring up something that you mentioned, Pluto in Aquarius. This past week in the United States, we have, a banking crisis unfolding. You have Silicon Valley Bank going under, Signature Bank being taken over. And I think this has a lot to do with Pluto and Aquarius because Silicon Valley Bank was for tech startup companies. That was, the main depositor base. And now we're seeing Pluto come into the picture. The federal government and the FDIC had to come in and back up depositor bank accounts above the previous mark of 250,000 USD. And then Signature Bank actually was a very big player in the cryptocurrency market. So we're kind of seeing that Pluto in the form of the government and the regulators coming in and basically manipulating the books of the banks, backing up depositors, shutting down another one tied to crypto. So I think that has a lot to do with that transit. So let's go ahead and take a look at the 10-year interest rate. we're looking at the interest rate here, so it has an inverse relationship to the price. But this is basically the yield, the interest rate that determines the price of the 10-year Treasury note, which is coming off of a primary cycle low. So this is pretty good news, with respect to liquidity, and as we go into home buying season. Pouyan, I know you work in the property market. So what's happening in your view in interest rates?
We're hoping they're going to start stabilizing because until the central banks stop these aggressive hikes, and the Bank of England has pretty much been doing exactly, has had the same policy as the Fed. They've been hiking rates quite aggressively over the past year. And what we find in the property market is the mortgage providers add on extra risk premium onto that, and you really don't see the mortgage market stabilize before the central banks slow down their hikes. And once that stability comes into the market, then we find a lot more products will come out to the consumers. So it's been very turbulent from my own experience and from other developers and people involved in the housing industry here in the UK. So very turbulent, but it's also been interesting because with the geocosmics, we were discussing, you and Ray were discussing it, and we were learning from you with regards to the long-term interest rate patterns linking in the Saturn-Pluto cycle.
Yeah.
And you guys warned us, I think, as early as 2021, that we may have seen the lowest rates we're going to see in a very long time, and to be aware of that. We knew there was going to be a high inflationary environment coming up. And unfortunately, in the UK, we don't necessarily have those very long-term fixed rates that you can lock in for the mortgages. But I think you can go up to, quite comfortably, you can go up to 5 years on some of those interests, some of those mortgages. And all the ones that came up, we did try to lock in before these rate hikes, but it's concerning because a lot of people are in fixed mortgage products. When they come out of those, they're going to see a significant increase, and that's going to have a knock-on effect on house prices in the UK. So we'll be looking at seeing some of that over the next 12 to 24 months, I would say.
Very good. Thank you for that. Now, to tie into that inflation explanation that you just gave us, let's take a look at crude oil, primary driver of inflation expectations. Clearly, the 3-year cycle has not bottomed out yet, but it's almost better now that crude oil is making new lows, in my opinion, with respect to the geocosmic situation. Saturn going into Pisces is a big part. We have an important CRD period next month in April, and we're going to see aspects like a conjunction between the sun and Jupiter, which is known to lead to reversals in crude oil. So Pouyan, I know that you highlight crude oil, Brent specifically, in your monthly addendum report. So what's your take on what's going on in the energy market right now?
This is one of the markets that we are very bullish on in the long-term view, and we can see the 3-year cycle forming. And we're again right in that time zone where we're expecting a significant trough. Going into last week, I was thinking, when is it actually going to start forming? And it suddenly went for it. So it's good to see that our expectations are starting to materialize, and we are entering the time band now from next week, I would say, for the primary cycle. Now, the primary cycles could always contract or extend, right? Especially when we've got a long-term cycle, like a 3-year cycle forming. So we're looking at all the technicals at the moment, and looking at if you look at the long-term chart, if you zoom out of this, what we can also see is from the 2020 low, looking at the Fibonacci retracement that's taking place on the WTI, it hasn't really quite got to the 50% correction just yet. On the Brent, it's just gone through that 50% correction, and that was the target I was looking for. If you got it out there, just above $60, you have $61. You're looking at you're on the WTI. So $69. It has just gone below on your chart in terms of where we were looking for a target. And in that time band between, in that price band between $53.91 to the 83.16, that's exactly where we would want to see that 3-year cycle forming.
Yeah.
So we're expecting a strong rally as soon as that 3-year cycle is in.
Yeah.
So that's a market I'm watching very closely at the moment and starting to build positions as new lows are being made.
Well, we were talking about central banks a moment ago, and I was actually reading that the Federal Reserve this past week has actually been adding assets to their balance sheet. And so could this be a catalyst to reignite inflation again? I mean, I've talked about Jupiter going into Taurus in May, and how that seems to me to be an inflationary aspect. Now, you're talking how crude oil is due for a 3-year low when we know that the first phases of all cycles are bullish. So if and when, well, it's not if, but when crude oil forms the 3-year low, it's kind of lining up like the second half of the year, we could be talking about inflation again 6 months from now. That has been one of my concerns is, crude oil peaked a year ago now. It peaked in the first week of March, so over a year actually, and we've still had higher than expected inflation CPI reports. So if that's happening while crude oil is correcting, then what happens once crude oil forms a 3-year low? What's that going to do for inflation expectations, come September, October, November of this year? So something to keep in mind. Pouyan, let's talk about what's going on in precious metals, because big move. I'm pulling up this chart of GDX. This is a gold miner ETF covered in the MMA monthly ETF report that's going to be sent out next week. So Pouyan, what's your take on gold? And I'm happy to talk and look at silver if you want to pull that up too.
Sure. Our long-term outlook on gold was essentially quite bearish going into the year, and we knew there was an intermediate cycle forming, break hold that pretty much spot on in September, and there was a strong rally that went all the way back up, almost forming a triple top to the all-time highs. And again, all the reports have been pretty much spot on with regards to the primary cycle that's just formed. Again, we're seeing gold rally up. Exactly, that's it right there. We're seeing it rally up towards those strong resistance points we have around the 2000 mark. But because we are bearish on the long-term outlook, we've got the 23-year cycle low due anytime starting from the next 12 months. So we do need to see gold make that correction back down and a significant trough to form close to 2024. So my outlook on gold is starting to switch to shorting the primary cycle. So every time a new cyclical high is made, I'm looking for technical indicators for us to short them on the way down. And it's kind of hard when you see it rally so quickly in such a short time to have that outlook.
Well, we might have a couple months left in this rally. If we came out of this primary cycle low here, we're talking about this being a 16-month low back in September. But, as long as Jupiter is in Aries, Sun's exalted in Aries, Jupiter can lead to demand. Gold metals might have another month or two left in the tank in the rally. But after that, I tend to agree that it has some serious headwinds, especially if inflation does pick back up and interest rates follow. Metals have not been doing well in a high interest rate environment. They don't pay any yield. So they're doing well this week as, the banking system in the U.S. comes under stress, and, gold and silver are the currencies that are some of the two currencies that have no counterparty risk. But, when fiat pays yield, then they have a preference toward that. So let's go to another type of currency.
Yeah.
Cryptocurrency, Bitcoin. What a move this is. Absolute explosion higher after we formed a half primary cycle trough last week, a week ago from today. I mean, that is quite the move, Pouyan. I mean, up over $6,000 or almost 38% in a matter of a week. But we knew based on off our, excuse me, off our cycle counts and the signatures coming into this week that Bitcoin was due for a low. And I can't say that I was looking for a move of this magnitude, but maybe you were. So what do you think is happening in the crypto space?
Yeah, it's interesting because a couple of significant events have started to occur. The cryptos, especially Bitcoin, had started to build up a strong correlation, positive correlation with the Nasdaq, which is strange. The cryptos were designed to act as safe havens, essentially as gold and silver have been doing in the past. So historically, well, there's not much of a history to the cryptos. They're very new, but they used to have a strong correlation with the precious metals that broke down over the past year as we've seen the equity markets dropping, especially the tech-heavy Nasdaq. We saw the same thing happening with the cryptos. And I think this week we've kind of seen that correlation really break down with gold and especially the Bitcoin rallying very aggressively now. And acting almost as a safe haven as we've had all the negative news in the press around the banking system and the banks. And the other interesting thing is, I think, again, yourself and Ray were calling the 4-year cyclical low for the Bitcoin around about the fall of 2022. And I remember in a chat group we have with our classmates from MMTA2, as the FTX exchange went down, everyone was exchanging messages. This is essentially the fundamental news we were looking for the cryptos to bottom out. Everyone was panicking. And I think for the first time in my life, I was in a scenario where I was very aggressive on a particular asset class when everyone else was panicking. So I went in quite aggressively at that point, and it seemed to drag on. I was expecting a strong rally off of that, and it's dragged on, and we're only now seeing those strong rallies. So it's good to see, and for the first time in my life, I feel like I really utilized all the information out there and have a good understanding on what's going on in the markets. Finally making some money. So I can't complain.
Well, a lot of interesting stuff in Bitcoin. First of all, it has a very long primary cycle compared to, stocks or commodities. So it does take more time to move, to see those bigger moves. But, I think Pluto going into Aquarius has a lot to do with crypto as well. I don't think that I'm not necessarily in the camp that Bitcoin's going to make a new all-time high anytime soon because of the boom bust pattern associated with Uranus and Taurus. But I do think that we're in a new bull market for crypto, and it is a tradable bull market. But I think from a geocosmic standpoint, Pluto and Aquarius is the grid, like the utilities. Pluto is taxes. I think that there could come a time where the banks buy up a lot of the crypto infrastructure, and you might have to make your tax payments with a digital currency. That might not be how we have to transact every day, but it might be, hey, if you want to record your taxes, it might not be, probably won't be mandatory at first, but I wouldn't be surprised if we saw that type of system rolled out in the next couple of years. Because that just seems to tie in with Pluto going through Aquarius. So, Pouyan, that's all the time that we have today to go over charts. So let me stop sharing my screen here. I want to highly recommend everyone check out Pouyan's MMA monthly addendum report. That's going to be published on the 27th of March. So a couple of weeks from now, actually about 10 days from this recording. That's a very excellent written report with a lot of visuals and charts and graphs that if you're more visually oriented, I recommend you check that out. Then we have the MMA grains report published a couple days later on the 29th, written by MMTA graduate Wyatt Fellows as well. Pouyan, this weekend we have the start of MMTA 3. So you were an MMTA student. So could you take a moment just to tell us a little bit about your experience with MMTA and everything you were talking about? A lot of that comes from there, but just recount your time with MMTA a little bit for us here.
I feel like it was one of the best opportunities I had in my life. I was so lucky to have seen that first round of reports that Ray was producing, and when underneath it he said, I'm going to have the classes and restart them in 2021. I thought this is going to be amazing, and I already had high expectations going into the course. But then as soon as we started it, like, one of the things I didn't expect was to have so much information thrown at you so quickly, and absorbing it. But at the same time, we were actually discussing the markets. A lot of these big calls were made by yourself and Ray from week one when we started the course. And it's been interesting building up the experience and understanding how to analyze the markets. And coming out of it and looking back now, I can't really, it's hard for me to put into words the understanding that one gains in what's happening around them, not just in the markets, I would say generally in the world and global affairs. It does really help. And equally, I would say the friends that we made on that course, we are all still in touch. And anytime that there is a big trade like the crypto one that comes up, we share it, we discuss it in the group and get other people's perspectives, what their price targets are, what they think is happening. And that's really valuable.
I agree. I mean, we basically have our own network of global traders that all speak financial astrology. So it's very nice.
Yeah.
Pouyan, thank you so much for that. As I said, MMTA starts this Saturday, March 18th. We also have the monthly ETF report coming out next Wednesday on the 22nd. So that's all we had for this week. Thank you, everyone, for watching. Thanks again, Pouyan, for joining us. We'll have you back again in a moment's time. So have a great weekend, everyone. See you same time, same place next week.